At this point, the Russian war effort seems almost unsalvageable, and they're just trying to grab whatever they can and get out the door. So, obviously, Russia is having a bad time right now. Their battle for Kherson did not go exactly swimmingly, to say the least. It went pretty badly, very, very badly, and the reaction from the Russian public has not been positive. They had to withdraw from Kherson, and now it seems that many people amongst Russia are withdrawing their support for Vladimir Putin. And one of those people that seems to be surprising to a lot of people, but isn't really historically, if you read some of the things that Alexander Dugin has said about Putin, but he goes further here than he's ever gone about Putin and criticizing his government. It's actually pretty intense. Now, maybe it's understandable when you take into consideration that his daughter, Alexander Dugin, was killed in a bombing attack that is tied to the war in some capacity. We still don't know all the details. But he believes, at least he says he believes, that it was done by Ukraine. And if that's the case, maybe it understands why he's had such a negative reaction to the surrender of Kherson. But it kind of sounds like he's low-key threatening Putin in this message, which I don't know if there's coming back from that. So let's read the letter that he wrote. For its entirety, we'll put on a little bit of background music, you know, to make sure it has good themes for his glorious speech. Kherson is surrendered. A Russian city was surrendered, the capital of one of the regions of Russia, the same as Belgorod, Kursk, Donetsk, and Simferopol. I don't know how to say that. If you don't care, then you are not Russian. Russians are now clenching their teeth in pain, weeping and suffering as if their hearts were torn out. Their children, brothers, mothers, and wives were killed in front of their eyes. If you aren't hurting now, you're nothing. Authorities, they are responsible for this. What is the meaning of autocracy, which is what we have? I love how open he is about it, but he's an open autocrat. We give the ruler absolute fullness of power, and he saving us all, people, state, people, citizens at a critical moment. If he surrounds himself with shit or spits on social justice, that is unpleasant, but at least he is saving us. What if he isn't? Then the fate of the King of the Rains. That's a reference to a king that was disemboweled, by the way. Autocracy also has a downside. Completeness of power in the case of success, but also completeness of responsibility for failure. You thought otherwise? How to get out of the situation? Immediately move from a sovereign to a commissioner dictatorship. That is, introduce an ideology. The ruler almost did, but again, almost. And Kherson was surrendered, not almost. It was completely surrendered. No issues with Servakin. That's the general in charge. He is not a politician. He is responsible for the technical side of that front. The strike is not him. You know, the strike is not at him. You know whom, and no PR will save her here anymore. You know whom, and no PR will save here anymore. This is the reference to Putin. In a critical situation, political technologies do not work at all. History speaks today, and it utters terrible for us words. This is not a betrayal. This is a step towards Armageddon. The conditions of the winning West, the civilization of Satan, will never be accepted from Moscow. This means that tactical nuclear weapons and strategic nuclear weapons will remain. That is the end. And here is the most important thing. Under the pressure of the circumstances, and it is very bad that it is so, it is terrible that this is so, we made a number of military political corrections with the management of the special military operation. But it hasn't worked out. The last resource is ideology. The real one, not the fake one that the presidential administration, scared to death by the uprising of reality, is ready to sell. Stop playing around. Russian idea. Only that. It is foolish to go for the total destruction of mankind only because of the fear of the Russian idea of our ideology. There is no other way. The authorities in Russia can't surrender anything else. The limit has been reached, but there are not enough purely tactical means for victory. The war must become a people's war in full measure, but the state should become popular Russian too, not like it is now. So, this is a lot. This is a lot. I mean, I don't want to say Putin got canceled, but Putin got canceled by Dugin. Like, let's look at the core lines here that we have underlined. Let's look at some of the core lines here. What if he isn't, in reference to isn't saving us? Then the fate of the King of Reigns, in reference to a king that was, killed by his people. Autocracy also has a downside. Completeness of power in the case of success, but also completeness of responsibility for failure. You thought otherwise. This is in reference to Vladimir Putin being an autocrat, which is what, Dugin likes. Therefore, he is the autocrat. He is in control. If things are going wrong, it's his fault. This is him placing blame at the feet of Putin and also making a low-key death threat against him. And to further clarify that this is about Putin, he says later, the strike is not at him. This is reference to Servakin, the general. You know whom, and no PR will save here anymore. This is again them saying indirectly that this is Putin. You know who's responsible, but I'm not going to say it. Because again, there's fear that if he said it was Putin, that, Dugin might fall out of a window. Quite honestly, this might be too far, and we might find out that Dugin fell out a window in the near future. Who knows? And lastly, the authorities in Russia can't surrender anything else. The limit has been reached. Basically, what Dugin is saying here is, hey, you gave up the Kiev offensive, so you had to give up Bucha, you had to give up Chernobyl, you had to give up all that. You gave up the Kharkiv counteroffensive. You were pushed back. You lost Kupiansk. The Ukrainian army is marching in to Luhansk. And now you've lost not only the Battle of Lyman, but now the battle for Kherson. You've lost the battle for Kherson, the second most populous city they've occupied since the start of the war. They captured it very early in the war on March 2nd, and the only regional capital they've caught the whole time, a territory that they announced as part of Russia formally annexing it, but showing that piece of paper, that annexation, was only paper thin and stood no chance against Ukrainian tanks, armored vehicles, rifles, and determined Ukrainian soldiers backed up by artillery and HIMARS provided by the West. He's basically saying this is the red line. You give up anything else, and there's going to have to be a change in leadership. Now, when he says that doesn't mean that if there was a Duginist coup, very unlikely, it would probably be some other oligarch that got rid of Putin, or some military official, if this did happen. But if there was one, in his world, it wouldn't be, hey, we got rid of Putin, now let's end the war. It would be, hey, we got rid of Putin, now let's fight the war better. We need a more ideologically pure Russia. We need a more authoritarian Russia. That will win the war, which is delusional. At this point, the Russian war effort seems almost unsalvageable, and they're just trying to grab whatever they can and get out the door. Dugin doesn't like the situation, and him making a kind of veiled threat at Putin openly like this is a huge break in precedent for what Dugin has been willing to say in the past, and what he's saying now, and what could be willing to be said about Russian leaders. If Putin doesn't react to this and crack down upon it, there might be other statements like this made by other people, and then it might spread to a point where you can't crack down upon it all. We're seeing the cracks starting to form in Russian society, and by God, they're scary for Putin. Putin too soft for Dugin? True, he is too soft for Dugin. He is unironically too soft for Dugin. Dugin's leading Russia, or some Duginists, would be incredibly disastrous. It would be. Not only because he has no idea what he's doing, and he's mostly a charlatan who just repackages other people's ideas in books that he read of people who were smarter and thought of the ideas themselves. But I think also because this would basically just be doubling down on a war that's already doomed. And that could lead to the actual collapse of the Russian state. And I think we need to start talking about that. That if Russia loses hard enough, and they're unwilling to compromise and save themselves, they might inadvertently just go and lead into the destruction of the Russian state. That is a real possibility. A real possibility.